moving on to the next topic, unless there was anything else you wanted to say, was housing and facilities management. And then I think especially touching a little bit on outdoor access, which has been a really key feature of some of the research that you're doing at UBC.
Well, so I can start there. And I think that to me, this is one of the exciting areas because it is an area where we've actually merged with another IRC chair, which is Herman Barkema's chair on infectious diseases. One of our PhD students who finished here is now doing a postdoc with him, and we're sort of embarking on this adventure together. So outdoor access, and again, the work has been informed in large part because of some of the social science work that we've done, where the public does very much view the cows having outdoor access. And we have an industry, not just in Canada, but generally North America, where the majority of cows are kept indoors. They're fed their total mixed ration, and they're very, very productive. But we have here, this is a great example of misalignment between what the public sees and how the industry does, how they do their day-to-day management. But of course, I mean, in the northern Alberta, in the middle of winter, having cows outside is not, great for the cows. They don't necessarily want to be there. Or in the Fraser Valley region here, it rains all the time. So it's dependent on the time of year. It's dependent on the environment. And I guess where we've been, the majority of our work is also asking the cow what she wants. And we've done, I think we published the very first paper, Danny, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was in 2009 where we did that very first preference test. And we gave the cows the option of going indoors and outdoors. It was between May and September. And where did most of those cows, where were they during the day? They were inside, but they were almost always outside at night. And so that was on pasture. And now we're taking this, looking at, how do we define outdoor access? Can we give, what about an exercise lot? What about a bedded pack? This is where Anna Marika Smith's PhD work was so important, looking at different types of packs, looking at motivation for access to outdoors. So again, we don't have 20 years of research like we do with the calves, but we're starting to get a body of work in this area.
We have 10 years of research.
I guess 10 years, halfway there.
and I think it's important to say here on that is that, again, there's a couple things there. And again, as Nina brought it up, there's this issue of sort of trying to understand public expectations for dairying, and then at the same time, understanding the constraints that producers have, and trying to do research that provides a variety of solutions that different types of producers might be able to do. But it's not as easy as saying, oh yeah, like for example, in pasture, I think it would be easy to sort of believe that, well, if it's only, we keep the public happy if only we have the cows outside. I think the answer is more sophisticated than that. And as Nina just mentioned that, and the cool results she just talked about from that very early work, and we found that now time and time again, now other groups have found the same thing, is that actually, even though standard practice often with providing pasture has been to let the cows out in the day and bring them back at night, if you give the cows a choice, they pick exactly the opposite. In the nice summer conditions that we have here in our sort of Western Canadian situation anyways, is that the cows really want to be outside at night, but in the day when there's a lot of solar radiation, solar heating, they choose cows, and we have a well-designed freestall barn, the cows are often choosing to come and soar. So I think that also speaks, I think, to a real sort of opportunity for a made in Canada solution. I think it's a sort of a competitive advantage over what we have over the rest of the world. A lot of the rest of the world, I'm thinking of sort of Australia, New Zealand, South America, are using intensive pasture. But what we have is a very well-developed, sophisticated, often very good indoor housing. And I think that the result that Nina just mentioned about this cow choice is a real made in Canada sort of bonus that we have, is because we've got these great indoor systems, we can really provide pasture in a cow friendly way by sort of opening the barn doors, letting the cows go outside, which is typically in the summer at night, and then letting the cows take advantage of our beautiful indoor facilities when they need the shelter. And also the cows are obviously coming in to eat the beautiful mixed rations that we make them, because even though they like grazing, they still really like to eat our mixed rations. That's a whole nother part of the story.
You know, and we've done a lot of, you know, very practical studies in this area, you know, so, you know, following that original 2009 work, we had a postdoc at that time who was then, you know, did the next sort of question was, okay, if cows really want to be outside at night, what would happen if we sent them out at night and then brought them in during the day, and looking at the dry matter intake of their TMR. So how much did they eat less ration indoors if they were outside, had access to grass during the night? And what about milk production? And what we showed is that they ate just as much TMR. They just modified their feeding behavior to eat when they were inside during the day, and they produced the same amount of milk. So here we have a solution that from an economic perspective also works for the farmer. I mean, that's the last thing we want, is for farmers to go broke because, you know, we've all of a sudden come up with some sort of solution that just doesn't work for them. And I think, and again, one of the things that we're doing together with Herman Barkema's group is actually starting out by asking a bunch of questions to farmers, doing focus groups and getting their views on, you know, what are their potential, how do they see pasture outdoor access working for their farms? You know, because there are quite a few that actually do it. How do they make it work? Can we learn from them? And we're doing this sort of background work before we even actually do the next study. And so I think that allows us to do, as you said earlier, Carrie, to do research that is hopefully, you know, that much more closer to the heart of some of the problems that they face today.
So a little bit more about this topic. My understanding is that something that you're looking at for your future research is also a little more into the automation that's becoming more and more prevalent in housing.
Yeah, I mean, we're super excited about that. As Dan said earlier, we've had a long interest in individual differences. I mean, animal welfare is about trying to provide a good life for the animal, and that's the animal. And, you know, we have herds of animals, but there's individuals in that herd. And so this is where automation in some ways is a farmer's best friend, because it's going to allow us to individually monitor these animals housed in larger groups. And so we've actually got another student now. She's doing some interview-based studies with farmers and sort of their vision of technology. Again, you know, trying to set things up so that and I'm not sure if you're aware, but the UBC Dairy Center is actually going to go into a big renovation mode now, and we're going to install automatic milking systems. So a lot of this work will take place in the second half of the IRC when those systems are in place, but it's all getting ready for trying to do, you know, work on a AMS system, which is, I think, the fastest growing type of milking system in the dairy industry, North America wide, and also including Canada, that we're better able to ask questions that are relevant. And also, I think what's very important is, because the research facility is set up the way it is, we're going to be installing sort of 6 to 8 units. We'll be able to do, I mean, I don't know of another facility in the world that will be able to do sort of controlled studies in the way that we will hopefully be able to do those.
2 other things to add there, Kira, on the technology front. One is yet again with this, we're also interested in this interplay between the sort of social science aspect and the hard science bit. So one of the things that we're doing with this is we're actually interviewing farmers about how they're using their current technology and what they see as sort of the ways, the solutions that they're looking for. I think in a lot of cases, you know, the equipment that's available for dairy farmers to buy depends upon, you know, what manufacturers think they'll make money from trying to sell, right? And that's certainly the same with technology. So there's people out there trying to sell technology for problems, which still might be problems that the farmer has, but they don't recognize that they have, or they may not be problems that are really problems for the farmer at all. And so we're trying to really better understand the fit between what is the variety of needs out there, what are the kinds of technology solutions that farmers are looking for. And I guess the other thing that we've had a long history of doing is trying to put together technology in different ways, and try to sort of hack sort of old pieces of technology and use it in different ways. And so we've got lots of examples of that, but I mean, primarily around trying to better understand things like feeding and drinking behavior, and develop these sometimes really cheap, simple little measures of automation that could give us an early window, especially in knowing whether the cows are getting ill. And just to give you a hint of one way we're going right now, we've got this wonderful postdoc that's working on this project where she's trying to take these cow brushes, which are becoming common on farms. Many people use them. Of course, the cows love them. And what this student's doing is basically just putting a little bit of technology on top of that to monitor which cows use the brush when. And the idea is that maybe that'll tell us something about what's going on with that cow. And again, we're really interested in using this to try to develop practical tools for the farmer in terms of, are these cows that are likely maybe to calf soon, or are getting sick or experiencing some other kind of issue. So yeah, these are some of the promising areas that we're interested in.
And it's another, the whole idea of using technology to identify animals that are sick before the vet or the farmer notices that they're sick. I mean, it's not an area that we've just started thinking about yesterday. It's a tough area to work in. And so, some of the early work was, I think the first papers we published was in sort of 2007, 2008. And it was interesting. We were doing some work, visiting a company in Europe that was interested in this, and they were talking about all this work about feeding behavior and changes in feeding behavior to identify sick cows, and they were showing some data. And Dan and I are looking at each other, and it was, some of our early work that had been published in 2007 that nobody really wanted to talk about in 2007. And now in 2019, this was really, really important stuff and super exciting. And I think that's, for me, it was, I think for both of us, we just looked at each other and smiled and, we move on. But there's a lot of questions out there, and there's a lot of, I think part of what we get excited about is pulling these different things together. Like Dan said, hacking different pieces of electronic equipment. So, I was just thinking of one of our student Alexi's work, and we published this where he used a leg monitor that counts steps and put that together with time spent at the feeder to figure out how many minutes was the cow out of the pen. This is long ways from being commercialized, but these are sort of some of the things that we've been working on.
Yeah, and I think that's great, because certainly adoption of technology is already happening in the industry. And now we're in an area where producers are generating so much data that's not being used, or there isn't a way to really use it effectively. But some of the research that you're talking about now is, okay, well, maybe we can use this data and we can predict who's going to be sick or who needs more attention or who's doing what in the herd, and getting a little more of that, individualistic management.
Yeah, and I think the other part that comes with that, and this is a slow process, but we're seeing this increase in technology on farms, and a farmer may have, an automatic calf feeder over here, some sort of feeding thing over there. They automate all the technology in the milk parlor. And one of the big challenges that the farmers have right now is that none of those pieces of equipment talk to each other. And so it's very difficult to integrate that to make sort of bigger decisions at a more of a herd level. We've been working on some of those things, and at least a role, and maybe it's a minor role, is we've been pushing to try to get these companies to open up so that, piece of equipment A will talk to equipment B, and how do we make that happen? But it's not going to happen overnight, but we're pushing that.
Yeah, that's great. So I think we've already kind of been touching into the very last topic, but that is on cow health and lameness. So if you want to talk a little bit more about, again, where your research is going in that area.
And maybe just give you a quick example, Kara. So yeah, we talked about sort of using that automation for health. We're interested in actually in automation for lameness too, in a bunch of different ways. But maybe let's just leave that off for now, because one of the areas where we're doing some work now, which really I think might be very important in a practical way for producers, is in following lameness cases for an extended period of time. And scientifically, we call that longitudinal. You can think of it as research that takes a long time, because you're following animals over the periods of days or weeks or months, perhaps even. And why I think that's important in terms of that lameness conversation for farmers is now in things like ProAction, for example, farmers are being judged by the percentage of lame cows they have. And that's based on a one-off visit. And what we're finding is that those one-off visits, those one point in time assessments of lameness, really don't work very well. And that's why it's really important for us to be following animals for longer periods of time. The interesting observation is that for years, the sort of lameness research communities complained, because they said, us as researchers, we go on farm and we identify, let's say, 25 or 30% of cows lame. But if you ask the farmer, they'll typically say, no, I've got more like 7 or 8% of cows lame. And people have said, oh, that's because the farmers aren't good at identifying lame cows. But we're starting to think that also that's partly due to the farmers really assessing cows day in, day out, for example, in the parlor. And so their assessment of what is lame is different to what that researcher is going in on that one time. And so that's really a big thrust right now, is for us to sort of really come up with a much better understanding for the industry of what are the benefits of these longer term lameness assessments, and how do those fit with these short-term assessments. And that might actually also dramatically change the kinds of questions that we ask. So for example, from a welfare perspective, a cow that's lame day in, day out for months at a time, that's a really serious welfare problem. That's something we need to solve as an industry. But an animal that's lame one day and then gets better, that's sort of good news in a way, right? Or at least we need to understand what are the kinds of features that allow cows to get better versus what are the kinds of features that means that the cow's really developed one of these very long-term cases, perhaps a case that she's never going to get better from, in which case we need to do some other kind of intervention like culling at a really early stage for a case like that. So yeah, the time length of lameness and understanding that's really important. It's also really hard work. We have this wonderful PhD student doing some of that now. And then that also then comes back to the issue of automation, because if what we're now saying, and I'm afraid it is, that not only do we need to be scoring for lameness, we need to be scoring really routinely, then this turns us into a big job, and it makes it all the more important that we start to develop good automated tools for doing this.
And I think also another example of where, you've got those four research areas that, they're not unique ones. They all bleed into each other all the time. Mm-hmm. So we have another student who, we know lameness is a problem. We know that lameness there's lots of indication that it's a painful malady for these cows. And so Catherine McClellan is doing a study for her master's where she's identifying, so the student, Wally, that Dan talked about, that's doing the weekly lameness assessments of the cows, he's now identifying those cows that are lame for a long time. And then they run into this other trial where then Catherine takes half of them and they are allowed to go outside on pasture. So they can go in and out. They have this free choice world. They can stay inside the barn or they could go outside. And the other half have to stay inside 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is more typical. And I don't know what the results are, but she's now looking at, how do these lame cows behave? And is there ways that, is having access to pasture actually gives some of those cows an advantage in terms of shortening their recovery time or helping them recover?
And I think that's really important work because lameness research has been going on for years, and I think we've identified a lot of the risk factors, but we're still not seeing that, even though we have that knowledge, we're not seeing that reduction in lameness. So I think it's, maybe it's time for out of the box thinking and looking into other options and opportunities to address it.
I mean, I think that what Dan was talking about, this, Wally's work on looking at, how do we actually define a case of lameness? And we know from the work that we've done, the preliminary results, that a one-time assessment is just not going to do it. Because this really matters to the farmer. Because if you're on the wrong side of that bar, it creates a lot of hardship. And we also know that, farmers don't want their cows lame. But if we're going to make these assessments, we better be sure that we're categorizing these cows correctly. And I know, both of us have sit on different advisory councils. And lameness is, you go to any animal welfare dairy cattle assessment tool, number one criteria, let's go measure lameness, and let's go measure it on one day.
So I think that wraps up talking specifically about your IRC and where it's heading next, which I think is really exciting and something for producers to look forward to.